we don't know. I mean, there's only a few that are bigger. Like there's Binance, very opaque company. We don't exactly know.
And what has happened to Binance since FTX went down? Because it seems like they received additional scrutiny, right? Because now people are starting to look at it, and I saw that their value went down considerably.
Yeah, her and I believe Gary Wang were big executives. They're cooperating. They pled guilty. They're cooperating with the feds. I mean, they did this. Ultimately going to find out what we're doing here.
How many more of these are out there in the world?
As big as FTX?
Bizarre that so many people got duped. And I felt the same way about Bernie Madoff. You know, I'm not a financially aware person. I'm not into the market. I don't follow these things.
So before, it's like if I send you $1 and then you send that dollar on, we can easily trace that back to me, right? It's like here. But if I send $1 to you and everyone's sending you $1 and then you're sending $1 to all, is the experience of the lawyer that FTX then hires is like being complicit on a private call, leaked private call, trying to cover up this God mode scam like investment funds. They invested in a bunch of NFT projects. Mark Andreessen, I think, is the guy who runs it. Of what's going on. Now he's still like trying to say he did nothing wrong. He maintains he's innocent. And right now, actually, the big like kind of scam. The terms of service, they said results may vary. What's that about? I mean, ultimately, it's like, and so I realized like, oh, there's this sophisticated way that they're preying on my psychology, and they'll fall for something. Doesn't mean you're safe. Like you have to do. I hate to say do your own research because that's such an overused, like, scammy phrase. It's actually such like a phrase like that, you know, it's almost used. I lied my way into it. I can sort of lie my way out of it. And this is what he did. So prior to this, I'd interviewed him twice before, and I had kind of gotten hamstrung with like, you know, he's just so good at dodging stuff. And he launches Alameda Research first, which is just like this trading firm, which basically the idea here is we have some ideas. We're going to raise a little bit of money, and we're going to
party.
That's right, but
also to the Republicans.
This is what's wild. So
yeah.
Sam knew publicly in our current American climate, like
did you interview him before the scandal?
No, not before the scandal.
So it's like as it was going down.
As it was going down, he goes on all these Twitter spaces. He doesn't want to. He's doing interviews with
inevitable.
It is inevitable. So something to understand. FTX was insolvent long before it was realized that they were insolvent. Right? So he thinks he can reestablish control because he's so smart. He is such a good liar that he's like, I can just lie my way out of it. So I think that's why he ultimately talked. His idea was, if I
people that were standing out and saying this, none of this makes sense.
Right.
And who were those people?
So there were a few people. There was, and that's ultimately what he was doing. But it also looks like he was donating through some of his executives, and. I mean, the whole thing was shady all the way down. Like from the, you know, the arms of one huckster to another. Like it's just like it's almost to something worse. Everyone loses confidence. Everyone sells their FTT tokens. No one wants to buy it. It's worth nothing.
So how did this all fall apart?
Great question. So I saw this, and my experiences up to that point, it kind of led me to like. I want to say something, but why is nobody saying anything? It just seemed like there was this, you know, these people pitching this stuff and nobody was talking about it. So I made this random video, just a middleman, because there's no one who controls like Bitcoin. Like no one can say like no to a transaction. Now it's like there's nothing to stop you from sending that money, and then you crypto keys all the time. I mean, it's kind of an interesting idea where you go, I'm going to get in before everyone else. But a lot that these basically nerds in cryptography thought of, which is it's brilliant. I mean, it is brilliant because it is basically it's almost impossible to trace. Sort of this is a fraud because, you know, no one knew. There's a bunch of backing. So I made a video at the time being like, this crypto CEO just describes a Ponzi scheme. Then he comes up, prep school. He's kind of like built for success, right? He goes to MIT, goes to Jane Street as this quantitative trader, do these trades that are profitable in crypto. So the way he first made his money was he did something where he bought Bitcoin in U.S. and then he sold it on these Japanese is not surgery. You can just treat it naturally. Just don't worry about, hey, don't listen to the doctors. Don't listen to your general practitioner. You can just treat it with like colloidal silver, A1Z, A16Z. It was one of those, Sequoia or A16Z. One of them wrote this glowing review of Sam, basically saying he's going to be one of the first trillionaires. So all these something, because I was just like, why does this make some people tens of millions of dollars and nothing happens? Why are
Jamie's looking it up.
I thought I knew it off the top of my head, and now I don't want to say the wrong one. A16Z.
A16. So I decided to start pursuing it step by step, and at first it was like just me discovering, like, well, what is this? Well, how does this scheme work? Okay, so I buy this course, and then what? Regulation for, I guess, offshore crypto exchanges, right?
And so these campaign finance, these violations.
And it's like, well, what's fungibility mean? It means whether you were a guy withdrawing who is this degenerate day trader.
Gotten away with it?
So many of these scams are like these issues of either regulators not having time, not having the resources. I went to school for chemical engineering and hated it. I was miserable. I was like, I do not want my life to be earning 2% more of a bottom line for ExxonMobil. Or any kind of stuff. And you start to have repeat occurrences. Like I just cover stuff all the time, and you see echoes of the same thing. I just had somebody just a couple of days ago, I was interviewing for this news scheme we're looking at, and he said, CZ says, hey, maybe they don't have the money. I don't know, whatever. I'm just going to sell like $2 billion worth.
But he knew what he was doing.
Oh, for sure. He's a shark. It's really interesting because it was like a battle between FTX and one of their competitors, Binance. So the owner of Binance is, I think it's Changpeng Zhao. He goes by C. I started hearing about these tokens, and they're like, hey, selling courses, like it's always the new grift. You always have to find, because people figure it out. Like they go like, oh, that actually doesn't work. Like, hey, drop shipping is executives Ryan Salami or something. I think that's his last name. Salami. I don't know. I just don't know how to pronounce it. But he was like, yeah, the number 3 donor to the Republican Party. But it was all orchestrated through Sam. Sam, appreciate your transparency. Kind of kissing up a little bit. But I was just like, somebody has to ask him some real questions. So I had 2 prior little Twitter space interactions with him. And he kept getting away with the fact that put like let's say I have Ethereum, one Ether into this mixer, right? This pool of money. A bunch of people are putting one Ethereum into there's no Ethereum left. There's no Bitcoin left. You don't have the real tokens anymore. You just have your sort of nonsense FTT tokens, the tokens you invented. And he said, oh. So we were warning people, hey, this is probably insolvent. Get your money out. But CZ ultimately was the big, like, he was the most notorious and, like, well-respected. I mean, he was, really well-regarded in Wall Street. So when people invested with him, they knew the returns were insane, but you're the CEO as of 2020. He hands it to this a girl he actually had a relationship with, Caroline Ellison, right? And she supposedly controlled it. He said she did everything. And then he goes into the crypto space and he launches FTX.
He's very young, right? How old is he?
I think he is young. I'm not. Maybe you can look that up, Jamie. 31. Now I can just send you $100K. It's going to take me 5 minutes.
So that's why when people kidnap people's data and things along those lines, they like to get paid.
You can watch them. These are real people, Joe. You can be just like them. And so I started watching this and I started like seeing it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so interesting. And she would drink it up because she thought that would make her better. Ultimately, my dad convinced her, like, you got to get the surgery. Like this ain't gonna fly. You have to, ultimately get the surgery. They have to say what they have, where they're putting their money. They're subject to more regulation about like how they take care of customer deposits. One of the big things with FTX was they told people, hey, you put your money with us, we're not going to touch it. We're not going to move it. That's what $10 million or your data's lost forever. And you're like, call the police and you go, hey, track this guy. And they're like, to what? To a Bitcoin wallet? To outright the proceeds of criminals. I mean, we know that these criminals do launder their money through a lot of these crypto exchanges. through mixers. It's just sort of the FTX's influence went from the Bahamas reaching into the United States while technically not really being regulated by the United States.
Yeah, they were the number 2 donor to the Democratic Party. What was the first video?
I started as sort of like an interview show, nothing about scams. I had a channel before it. So this is funny. They found his League of Legends account, and during some of the calls after it was a fraud, you could hear him clicking in the background. Click, 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 click. He's playing League.
Chemtrails.
Let me say this. If it's too good to be true, if they're offering market returns that you want to believe in, you go, man, I want to believe this is real. Right? The inflation rate, I think, is like 75% or something like that. It's an unimaginable, it's just out of control inflation. And if you hold on to your Turkish lira, you're in for a bad time. There were some margin trading accounts. And I'm like, no, but there were people who didn't trade with margin. There were people who just put their money with you. And all they wanted
initially, he thought he was going to be able to figure out a way to pull all the company's assets together and
I think
make everybody sound and repay everyone.
Some reactions, but not much. What I noticed is it resonated with people beyond the views, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was just like, there was something different about the reaction to it. Elizabeth Warren wrote a letter to them. They're being looked at much more closely. I mean, ultimately, all of these things are so opaque in the sense that, right, it's all at some address. And so people were asking, like, you say you have all this Bitcoin, where's the Bitcoin? You say you have all this Ethereum, where's the Ethereum? There was a lot of fear of missing out, or FOMO, in the markets at the time. Everyone thought, oh, cryptos, you have to get in now, right? Because if you get in now, or with just put a bunch of garlic cloves in the pot. I still remember our house reeked. She would put 60 cloves of garlic in a stew
and sell off all his tokens. Would they be still solvent today, or still in operation today? Would they not crash, or was this inevitable?
Don't invest. That's a bad idea.
People were calling bullshit, though. Just like they were calling, there was a few people that were wary that were calling bullshit on Bernie Madoff, and there was a few
not actually like this incredible business that you thought it was, that you're going to get rich easily. So don't do that. Go do crypto. You got to get into crypto now. And then it became NFTs exchanges where it was worth more. So he was arbitraging this difference in prices, and then after he made his money that way, he lied to him safe because Tom Brady's got his money there. So I just put my money there.
Is the lure is like how Bitcoin used to be worth very little, and then one time it was with the high of Bitcoin.
Money and go start trading with it, unless obviously we have FDIC insurance, stuff like that. But they didn't have that. They just take your money, go trade with it, and that's where the disaster started. And give you this yield. He starts explaining this thing that sounds exactly like a Ponzi scheme, and so ultimately, Matt Levine's like, yeah, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. But again, it stopped short. I start covering it, and then I start to get cease and desist letters. They don't like that. So they start to send me, they say, hey, you better shut up or we're going to sue you. And I was like, okay. I'm not going to stop making these videos. I just, make something work. If it's going to go to the public, you have to solve all these issues. And unfortunately, we saw crypto kind of go mainstream before they had lack of regulation and the ability to send peer-to-peer, which means you and I can just send money to each other directly, no middleman. There's also a really huge opportunity for fraud, scams. When you withdraw, there's nothing tying your Ethereum to your particular address to this random external address because you send it to a different one. Sam goes, oh, you won our battle. And people were like, is it a battle when you lose billions of dollars of customers? He lost it on the platform. He says the 18 million was on FTX or whatever, and he never got $1 out of it. But that was what the deal was for. I have 2 employees, and both of them are overseas. One of them's in London, one of them's in Ukraine. And so for me, I have to pay them, and I have to do
why the celebrities are important. And that's why
it's a huge part of it.
The connection to BlackRock is important.
Huge part. Yes, because they're the legitimacy that says, hey, I'm, they're setting it up with I used to be broke like you. Well, that's a strategy. A lot of these guys were never broke, right? It's just part of the story you have to tell to be really effective. It's like
views about what? Like you didn't start doing this. You started doing just like a normal interview show?
I was just doing a normal interview show with a few of my buddies, and basically screaming about, all these scammers online. And unlike my previous work, which kind of had resonated, like it had gotten, the money system has to be safe. Like your grandma has to be able to charge back her credit card when there's a fraudster, right? Like, or this whole thing doesn't work. You can't rely on people being technically savvy in order to, like, the house always wins, right? So when FTX was taking off, it just seemed like everyone who was a someone was backing him. So then it was okay. And then I think a lot of these people deferred the person in the space to where people thought, okay, well, if he's saying it, he's a guy who only says positive things about crypto because he's a crypto executive. So if he's saying there might be problems, there's probably some problems.
But so when I see something like that go down, I'm like, how did he get Steven Spielberg? How does someone like a Bernie Madoff or Sam Bankman-Fried, how does he get these people to do this?
You put $100,000 into this little mixer, and then it sends $100,000 out later, and nobody knows where that money came from.
What is a mixer? How does it work?
It's interesting. So the most famous example is Tornado Cap. Everything. I don't have access to the book. Like, I basically knew nothing. So anytime you'd call him out on an issue, you'd say, where's the money? He goes, well, I don't know. It's gone. It's Alameda Research. Ask Alameda FTT tokens and pay everybody out.
Oh, that's what he thought? He's on amphetamines, right? So he can't be thinking totally clearly.
This is what was going on in crypto. They're called collateralized loans. But what FTX was doing was they were saying, hey, like, we'll take $1 million from you, but instead of giving you, I hate doctors so much, and it always seems to like end up with a sales pitch. Like, it never was like, hey, let me just give you this free thing. It was like always like there's a catch. Mm-hmm. So I didn't, and then you'll launch your own token that people can invest in, sort of like they're investing almost in your crypto exchange. And so that was actually one of the ways that FTX, it's sort of like hard. You kind of have to disprove every single, like there's always a new like health guy telling you that there's some new alternative discovery, whatever. And I was like, this is kind of weird. And I was like, why do they, I'm this guy who's going to maximize good in the world, and that was his reason for working all the time. I mean, that's the justification to be hopped up on amphetamines. It's like maximize productivity, maximize human happiness. It's a strange time, man, to be covering crypto, because I tried to tell people for years that this scam problem, this fraud problem, where's the money? I don't know, but he controls everything. And so it's like this is the tactic of these offshore companies is like you put the
analogy for losing your house.
What's funny? Yeah.
I mean, good Lord.
The idea of these mixers was you'd anonymize your transactions. So, like, let's say I hadn't really found my footing, but throughout my entire life, I had kind of had this relationship with, like, hucksters and fraud where, when I was in high school, my mom got thyroid cancer. Victims would reach out to me. They'd be like, hey, I'd been scammed by this guy, and I didn't realize what was going on. And you showed me, sort of like how the whole scheme worked. He's one of the leaders at the NASDAQ. I mean, he was one of the go-to guys. And so you thought, well, I invest with Bernie, like I can't lose. It's like almost, betting on the house. There were things that were coming out, like questions about, okay, they say they have all this money. Where on chain is it? So like the blockchain, everything's publicly, you can see it. And wanted to basically influence politics by just donating. And the idea is you donate to both sides, you can never lose, right?
Yeah.
If you have your role, you think you have this backstop because on the books it's worth, X dollars. Let's say it's like worth $5 a coin. But what you're not realizing is the real risk is when FTX can't pay you back, they probably can't pay anyone back. Not having sort of like, it's maybe not big enough. They're good people, a lot of the people going after these guys, but it's like trying to catch everyone who's speeding. Why not? Like, there were just no adults in that room, and like the few adults that there were like, they had like a criminal lawyer. Well, anyway, I don't think he's actually been convicted of anything. I shouldn't say that. They had this guy, Dan Freebled, the account, fiat at FTX. And so what prosecutors are now arguing is he knew, of course, what it was. He deliberately obscured, all the crypto people were trying to control regulations to favor their individual business situation. And so CZ felt like he was being cut out in Washington. I used to be just like you, Joe, but then, I found out that doing Amazon drop shipping is the way to make millions of dollars. And, I used to fail, but by these little tricks, I service that said, you cannot move, like when I deposit with you, you're not going to touch my money. And I said, Sam, if that's true, where's the money of all these people? Calling that a fraud early. I have a buddy of mine. He goes by Dirty Bubble Media on Twitter. He's like one of the Anon Twitter accounts. He was calling it a fraud. I'm blanking on the name right now. But
A1Z? What is that?
No. I'm sorry. I'm blanking on. It's this famous. I'm going to remember it right after I get out of here. It's one of the famous. The problem is when the exact moment FTX can't pay you back is the exact moment that FTT becomes worthless. So you think you have all this collateral. Smart thing, which is something like this happens, you shut up. You don't say anything.
Right.
And then you point at your boss. I mean, that's basically what they did.
Oof.
Which they for sure did stuff wrong too.
Regulated? Like if he was doing this, like Coinbase can't do this. Is that correct? Yeah,
Coinbase is much more heavily scrutinized. They actually have to file with the SEC on sticks or something. Like it was never – the problem was the foundation was wrong from the beginning. If you don't have enough deposits to cover withdrawals, you just don't have the money, right? You're –
crypto.
Ransomware, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, 100%. Because – before, it was like, okay, you need to use like Western Union or sort of one of these like these places where you can kind of send money without too much scrutiny. He's like, well, like think of it like a box. And, you tell a bunch of investors, hey, if you put money in this box, we can get some money out. We never understood how Bernie Madoff got people because it seems so preposterous. And then I fell for something very similar. And what I noticed with all of these things, the thread is, he blamed all the wrongdoing of FTX on Alameda Research. And he said, I don't control Alameda Research. Even though he was the owner, he's no longer... Actually, his whole technique of shifting the blame like onto Alameda and like, I don't control Alameda, I've seen something very similar. I'm investigating this Ponzi scheme that's offshore. As a Matt Levine interview with Sam Bankman-Fried. He didn't call him a fraud outright, but he's like, hey, it seems like you're in the Ponzi business and business is good.
Whoa. And what did he say to that?
Reasons that our banks have a bunch of anti-money laundering laws. There's a reason that they have all sorts of finance laws. It's not for their safety. It's for your safety. I mean, it's like they need to – I just wasn't interested. I was like, that's not my life. So I always wanted to sort of have a voice. And so I started a YouTube channel just doing random videos. Really perpetuated their fraud. I can break it down. How much do you know about the FTX
Let's
situation?
break it down for people that don't know about it. So
let's do it. So FTX was this crypto exchange. Crypto is sometimes national currencies aren't a great idea and you want an alternative. So like look at the Turkish lira. Like they tracked his account. He's playing League while on calls about the failure of FTX. Wow. Just imagine the arrogance.
Is that arrogance?
I really know what I was looking at the time. Then I go to college, and all my friends get an MLMs, multi-level marketing, sort of like just like the hey, you're going to get rich. So I was always getting invited to these like get rich Ethereum. What are we tracking here? And then it goes to some mixer somewhere, and then we don't know where it goes after that.
So when Sam Bankman-Fried was working with
very treatable kind of cancer, and she's fine. But at the time I watched her as she's like gets this diagnosis, gets swept up with all these hucksters who are telling her that the way to treat thyroid cancer, you can't do that and then say, oops, I played a little too much of my video games and lost billions of dollars. Like, this doesn't fly.
Well, he wasn't saying that I played the video games and that's why I lost the money.
But annoying. So
we don't need that.
The famous example is like Coinbase is in America and they have to file all these forms. They're a regulated entity. They're a publicly traded tease for a while. But like, so I eventually like pivoted into this crypto direction and learned all about that. But it started just from a curiosity about scammers. And I wanted somebody to say, he called it fiat at FTX. But it was a $10 billion hole.
What do you mean by mislabeled?
Well, it was on a spreadsheet, Joe. So he was put it on a spreadsheet for their balance sheet, and he mislabeled. Like, it was very clear the internal conversations were they knew they were committing fraud. They knew they were doing things wrong. And this idea was, well, no one's going to catch us, right? Nobody's abilities. It's hard to know. So people really just take you at face value, and they have to trust that, like, oh, other people are invested, so I guess I'll jump in too.
And that's
they're like, hey, don't work a 9-to-5 job, like be free like me. And I'm like, you're here on a Sunday at like 5 p.m. How free are you really? Like, you're just like, your hands in both pockets. But publicly, he's just like, he's donating to Democrats because he says, oh, I'm like this, like, I care about all these issues.
Yeah.
But it's like even more cynical than just buying one party. Most of this $10 billion is just their own tokens. So CZ takes this opportunity to kind of spread some, sort of information about that. He says, hey, we're actually very strange. And these offshore entities were also using like U.S. branches. Like there's FTX U.S., which was like more regulated, but not really that regulated. It
was like 70,000 or something like
60 plus. Yeah.
So that's the lure. The lure is you buy in for pennies, and one day you're insanely rich. I'm sure you know about that. And in the FTX case, how much of it was getting celebrities to endorse the platform?
It's huge. This is what I wanted to say. Like, the more I study each of that token, then you sell it off, and then the price plummets. So you thought you had a bunch of money, but actually it's worth nothing. Like, there's all these new scams that have emerged as a result of people getting interested in this idea of an alternative. Senator's office reached out to me. They're like, what do you think about this? And I was like, I don't know, man. You guys have to. This is y'all's thing to figure out. Ultimately, that's what ultimately matters is how much do you have on deposits that you owe out. And so with Binance, we don't really know. The only one we have a little bit more of a look into it was they wanted to store some Bitcoin with Tom Brady. They wanted to be alongside Tom Brady. So he's like, well, there was fungibility between wallets.
The fact that they were all living together and fucking each other in this giant penthouse, this $40 billion penthouse. The things, it's insane. It's really... I almost wish
everybody. I ask him, and he doesn't want to talk to me. So, but he's going on these Twitter Spaces. So I was tracking when he'd go on a Twitter Space, and I would contact the people ahead of time and said, "Hey, just kind of grifting here." And so, but you'd see him in nice cars, and so I was like, What am I looking at?" And then, as I'm doing my YouTube show, I'm like, I get fed a bunch, which thankfully she did, and she's fine now. She takes medication to replace the hormones her thyroid would generate. But I saw my mom kind of get swept in this thing that I knew was nonsense. But
I really enjoyed you catching him on Twitter Spaces. I really enjoyed that. I listened to that whole thing because before that, you have this guy who's this, what is it's a crypto exchange, right? So
yeah,
how does that work?
So the first question is when you learn about crypto. So he decides to donate dark to Republicans. And part of the accusation is he knowingly did this through one of his companies. So they have to report everything. So if you're offshore, you can kind of not do any of that. You can play fast and loose. And, for some people, they think that's better. They can offer, let's say, like 100x leverage. Eventually got paid out like $2 billion.
Whoa.
Yeah. Some of it was in this FTT token, though. So they have a bunch of FTT, right? And so it's like November was when all was going to undo sort of everything. Like if you don't root out the scams, you don't find ways to solve that, this is never going to work. Because if you're great... Yeah, tokens like is the individual, you can think of currency, right? So it's like the individual. So Bitcoin is, you have Bitcoin. Then you have, it's one of the cryptocurrencies. You have Ethereum. All these other guys buy into him.
Right.
And then they themselves are kind of also looking at each other being like, well, that guy did it. Like, what? It's the hottest deal. You believe,